The autumn sun streamed through the windows of Florida's state capitol as Attorney General Pam Bondi reviewed the files spread across her mahogany desk. The photographs showed pristine waterfront property in the Florida Keys, now contaminated with industrial waste from Coastal Chemical Corporation. Reports detailed elevated cancer rates in nearby communities. Medical records of children with rare respiratory conditions filled another folder. They knew, Bondi whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of an internal memo from Coastal Chemical. They knew for 12 years and did nothing. After months of investigation, her team had uncovered evidence that Coastal Chemical had deliberately dumped toxic chemicals into the water while falsifying environmental reports. The damage to both the ecosystem and public health was catastrophic. What Bondi didn't know was that her pursuit of justice would soon make her the target of one of the most powerful political machines in Florida, and test her resolve as never before. "We're filing charges next week," she told her chief deputy, William Chin. "Environmental crimes, fraud, endangering public health, the works." Chin looked uncomfortable. "You might want to hold off, General. Senator Rayburn called this morning. He'd like to meet with you privately." Bondi raised an eyebrow. Senator James Rayburn chaired the state's Appropriations Committee and controlled the purse strings for every agency in Florida, including hers. "Did he say what about?" "No," Chin replied. "But Coastal Chemical contributed over $3 million to his last campaign." Bondi closed the file. "Set up the meeting. But we're still filing charges." Senator Rayburn's office was a shrine to political power. Walls covered with photographs of him alongside presidents, governors, and celebrities. The man himself sat behind an imposing desk, not bothering to stand when Bondi entered. "Pam, good to see you," he said with practiced warmth that never reached his eyes. "I hear your office is pursuing some overzealous claims against Coastal Chemical." "We're filing criminal charges based on substantial evidence," Bondi replied evenly. "I'd hardly call that overzealous." Rayburn's smile tightened. "Let's be practical. Coastal employs 4,000 Floridians. They contribute millions to our economy. And according to our evidence, they've given at least 78 children rare cancers," Bondi countered. The senator leaned forward. "I've known you since you were an assistant state attorney. You've built a good reputation. It would be a shame to see that damaged." "Is that a threat, Senator?" "It's political reality. Before you go public with these allegations, consider your future. Your term ends next year. You have aspirations beyond this office, I imagine." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a draft announcement of a new environmental protection coalition, with Pam Bondi named as the future president at a salary of $750,000 per year. "The coalition launches after your term ends. Major corporations, including Coastal, will fund it. You'll have more resources to effect real change than you do now, without all this unpleasantness." Bondi closed the folder without looking further. "And in exchange, I bury the Coastal Chemical case. I prefer to think of it as pursuing more productive solutions than criminalization." She stood. "Thank you for your time, Senator." "Think carefully, Pam," Rayburn called after her. "Cross me on this, and not only will that coalition position disappear, but I'll make sure there's nothing waiting for you when you leave office." The next morning, headlines across Florida announced the Attorney General's lawsuit against Coastal Chemical. By afternoon, the counterattack had begun. A political action committee called Citizens for Responsible Governance launched a $1 million ad campaign questioning Bondi's motivations and competence. Industry-friendly news outlets began running stories about regulatory overreach and anti-business crusades. Then the personal attacks started. An anonymous source leaked information about Bondi's dating history to tabloids. Old case decisions from her prosecutor days were suddenly scrutinized and misrepresented. Social media filled with doctored photos and false claims. At her weekly staff meeting, Bondi could see the toll it was taking. 2 senior attorneys had requested transfers. Funding for her office's operations was suddenly under routine review by Rayburn's committee. "They're coming at us from every direction," Chin said, sliding a newspaper across the table. The headline read, "AG's Crusade Against Job Creators, Personal Vendetta or Political Ambition." "There's more," Chin continued. "The governor's office called. He wants you to consider all options, including settlement." "The governor is running for Senate next year," Bondi replied, "and needs Rayburn's support." "Exactly." She looked around the room. "Anyone want to tell me we should back down?" The silence was broken by Maria Vasquez, a junior attorney who had interviewed many of the affected families. My cousin lives in that community. Her son has leukemia. There are 26 children in his elementary school with cancer. Bondi nodded. Then we press on. The following Sunday, Bondi attended service at her longtime church in Tampa. As she slid into her usual pew, she noticed several unfamiliar faces watching her intently. When the collection plate came around, one of them took photos of her donation check. 2 days later, her pastor called, deeply disturbed. "Pam, the strangest thing happened. A reporter showed me photos of your contribution checks going back 5 years, claiming you've only donated a total of $750. They wanted me to confirm you're not a generous person." "That's absurd," Bondi replied. "You know Of course I do. I told them their information was false. But how did they get photos of your checks at all?" The invasion of privacy was shocking, but not as shocking as what came next. That evening, her elderly mother called in tears. 2 men claiming to be fraud investigators had visited her assisted living facility, asking invasive questions about Bondi's childhood and implying she had been involved in financial improprieties. "They frightened me, Pamela," her mother said shakily. Bondi felt a cold fury building. This wasn't politics anymore. This was intimidation. The pressure campaign escalated. Bondi's former law partners received tax audits. Friends reported strange men photographing their homes. Her personal bank questioned the renewal of her mortgage. Then came the court motions. Coastal Chemical hired 5 prestigious law firms who filed motion after motion to delay the case, drain her office's resources, and bury her team in paperwork. At a press conference about an unrelated consumer protection case, reporters ignored the topic to pelt her with hostile questions about the Coastal lawsuit. One asked if she was pursuing the case to rehabilitate a failed career, quoting directly from Senator Rayburn's talking points. That night, arriving home exhausted, Bondi found her front door ajar. Heart-pounding, she called the police. Nothing appeared stolen, but her home had clearly been searched. Family photos were slightly misaligned. Drawers left partially open. The message was clear. They could reach her anywhere. The police detective looked grim as he took notes. "Ms. Bondi, who would want to intimidate you this way?" She thought of the children with cancer, of Rayburn's threats, of Coastal Chemical's billions. "I'm the Attorney General," she replied wearily. "It could be anyone I've prosecuted." But she knew exactly who was behind it. As the preliminary hearing date approached, Bondi received an unexpected call from Robert Marshall, a retired judge with impeccable credentials who had once been her mentor. "Pam, I rarely interfere in active cases, but as someone who cares about you, I'm concerned. This Coastal Chemical matter has become a political firestorm." "Because Rayburn made it one," she replied. "Perhaps. But you've made powerful enemies. Think about settlement options. You could still claim victory and preserve your future." "Did Rayburn send you?" The painful silence confirmed it. "Bob, 78 children have cancer. Coastal Chemical executives knew their actions would cause this. Would you let that go unpunished?" "No attorney general operates in a vacuum, Pam. You have to work within political realities." "When did justice become negotiable?" she asked quietly. After hanging up, Bondi sat at her kitchen table, utterly alone. Former allies had abandoned her. Her staff was demoralized. Her personal life had been invaded. Her professional future was being systematically destroyed. For a moment, just one human moment, she considered calling Rayburn and accepting his offer. The coalition job would allow her to save face. The personal attacks would stop. Her mother would be left in peace. Then her eyes fell on a card she had received weeks ago from Sophie Martinez, the mother of an 8-year-old leukemia victim. Inside was a crayon drawing by Sophie's daughter Elena. It showed Pam Bondi wearing a superhero cape with childish handwriting. "Thank you for fighting for us." Elena had died 3 days after sending the drawing. Bondi picked up her phone. The courtroom was packed for the preliminary hearing. Coastal Chemical had spared no expense. A dozen attorneys in expensive suits sat at the defense table, flanked by PR specialists and corporate executives. Judge Harriet Wilson, newly appointed and mindful of her political future, seemed visibly nervous to be presiding over such a controversial case. When Bondi entered with just 2 attorneys at her side, murmurs rippled through the gallery. Many had expected her to bow to pressure and settle. The consensus among political insiders was that Bondi was committing career suicide. "The state may present its evidence," Judge Wilson announced after preliminary matters were handled. Rather than begin with legal arguments, Bondi did something unexpected. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to introduce some people." She turned to the gallery. "Would the families affected by Coastal Chemical's actions please stand?" Nearly half the courtroom rose. Parents holding photos of deceased children, elderly people with oxygen tanks, young adults obviously weakened by illness. "The defense will object to this emotional display," began Coastal's lead attorney. "This isn't a display," Bondi interrupted. "This is evidence. Every person standing represents a human cost of corporate decisions that prioritized profit over safety, greed over human life." Then she played her trump card. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence documents that came into my possession yesterday." Her team distributed copies to the startled defense attorneys and the judge. "These are internal emails and memos from Coastal Chemical spanning 12 years. They show unequivocal knowledge of contamination and deliberate falsification of safety reports. They also show," she paused, looking directly at Coastal's CEO, "extensive communications with Senator James Rayburn regarding campaign contributions explicitly tied to regulatory protection." The courtroom erupted. Coastal's attorneys jumped to their feet shouting objections. Reporters rushed from the room to file breaking stories. "Additionally," Bondi continued when order was restored, "I've submitted to federal authorities evidence of criminal intimidation, including harassment of witnesses, invasion of private property, and attempted blackmail of a state official." She didn't mention that the evidence had come from an unexpected source. One of Rayburn's own aides, whose niece was among the cancer patients, and who had secretly recorded the senator's conversations for months. "This case isn't about politics," Bondi concluded. "It's about whether we have the courage to hold the powerful accountable when they harm the vulnerable. It's about whether justice still matters in Florida." The hearing lasted 3 days. By its conclusion, Judge Wilson had allowed most of the evidence to proceed to trial, denied Coastal's motions to dismiss, and set a trial date, much sooner than the defense had hoped. Outside the courthouse, Bondi faced a wall of cameras. The narrative had completely shifted. Now reporters wanted to know about the evidence of corruption, about Rayburn's involvement, about the families affected. Attorney General Bondi, today's ruling is being called a victory for environmental justice. What's your response? She thought carefully before answering. Today isn't about victory. It's about accountability. For too long, powerful interests have believed that they can escape consequences by applying pressure, by threatening those who stand up to them, by corrupting the very systems designed to provide justice. She looked directly into the cameras, knowing her words would reach Rayburn and everyone else who had tried to silence her. Let today be a message. No one is above the law. Not corporations. Not politicians. Not the wealthy or well-connected. When you harm Florida's citizens, when you poison our environment, when you put children's lives at risk for profit, you will be held accountable. In the aftermath, Coastal Chemical faced not only Bondi's lawsuit, but federal investigations into corruption and environmental crimes. Senator Rayburn announced he would not seek re-election, citing health concerns. Several of his top aides resigned or faced charges. Pam Bondi never got the coalition job or the $750,000 salary. She never again enjoyed the easy political allegiances that come with avoiding controversial fights. But 6 months later, when Coastal Chemical was ordered to pay $1.2 billion in damages and remediation costs, and 3 executives received prison sentences, Bondi received a package at her office. Inside was a handmade quilt. Sewn into it were photos of 78 children, the victims of Coastal's actions. Some had survived. Many hadn't. Attached was a simple note from their families. "When no one else would stand for us, you did. When they came after you, you didn't back down. Thank you for showing us that justice is still possible." For Pam Bondi, that meant more than all the political power in Florida. Sometimes justice requires standing alone, until you're not alone anymore.